Not for you, because you've decided this is exciting and you in a group who really do that. But I can remember that excitement when it first came.
3 years, am I right?
Nearly 3 years it's taken, yeah.
From
it's been
idea to...
From 2.5 years, yeah, from initial idea to finally finishing it last week.
Yeah. And you've just been telling us about how different ideas came up at different stages through the filming and shifted it in different ways. So how far is this final product from 2.5 years ago?
God, when we started, we really thought that it was going to have a particular structure, that I was going to market nature fantastically successfully and figure out ways that children would go outdoors more. And of course, it just never really works out the way that you think it's going to. And early on we met with branding experts and marketeers, and it became really obvious that there was no way that we could conduct anything like a kind of proper marketing campaign on the scale that would be necessary to change hearts and minds and get people involved. So it was lots of things changed on the way, but one of the big things was to realise that we needed to sort of play dirty, or at least be more guerrilla in our approach about how we marketed nature.
And the kids are just did you start from the disconnect? There is this disconnect, and that was your get-go. That was.
I think I noticed probably about 4 years ago, when my daughter was 2, that she goes outside far less than I did when I was a child. And my mother lives with us in a house, and she's 80, and she used to go outside even more than I did. So there was clearly a kind of big generational change going on. And it wasn't really to do with living in different places, it was just simply that there was much less acceptable and much less normal now just to go outside. It wasn't the thing that was done. And there were loads more options for the children. So now they'll grab an iPad or switch on the TV or play a board game, or perhaps they'll be being pressured by us, the parents, to do homework. So their lives are scheduled in a much more intensive way than I think mine was, and certainly than my mother's was. And that precludes nature. So I think that was the starting point, and then I started wondering, well, who's selling all these other alternatives to the outdoors to children? Because they're obviously doing it very successfully, right? Because they're not outdoors. I looked at my daughter's sort of pie chart of her average day. I attached a camera to her, and poor thing, and kind of studied her for a while. And on average, she's outdoors for about 4% of her waking day, and that's kind of one of the lowest slivers of time that I could find. It's lower than time she spends in the bathroom or in the car. It's right at the bottom of the choice thing, and miles below the computer.
How does she get to school?
She gets driven. Yeah. And I wish that I walked with her, but it's too far. So it's not an option, and the roads are too busy for me to feel comfortable with her walking on her own or with a group of friends. So yeah, things have changed. Obviously, some of the reasons why children don't go outdoors anymore are for rational, really sensible reasons, like the fact that there's so much more traffic around, and that is a genuine danger. But some of the reasons they go outside are completely unreasonable reasons, like, for example, that their parents are afraid of them being snatched off the street by a child snatcher. Now, the odds of that happening are vanishingly small, and certainly no higher than they've ever been in recorded history, and yet we see it as this terrible fear. So it definitely started with my circumstances, and me hoping that I might be able to persuade my children to demand nature in the way that they demand Disney and Nintendo.
Right. I'm also interested, because I saw Raising David a few years ago. Without having seen this film, remembering your premise of that fear of being watched, does that filter in? Because you've made them both, they must do, but on a very.
I think the connection between them in my mind is that what really exercised me when I was making Erasing David was the idea that there is a state and corporate sponsored cabal which is very eager to know as much as it possibly can about us for the purposes of control and exerting as much financial pressure on us to spend as much as possible. And that really bothered me, and it particularly bothered me when it related to my children. And the way that Project Wild Thing follows on is that looking at my children and seeing the way that they're manipulated by brands bothers me very, very much, because
with the parents as mediators.
often, but sometimes not. Sometimes they're spoken to directly. I went to an island in the middle of nowhere in Scotland and met with some children there. They barely have very much TV there, but they all happily sang me the Go Compare advert, because they all heard it and they all knew it. And okay, I'm not particularly shocked by that, so it's a good advert or a funny advert or whatever, it's in there. But the bottom line is that the studies show that children are receiving thousands of marketing messages a day, kind of whether they like it or not, some through their parents and some directly. And these alter their behaviour because the marketeers are really, really good at what they do.
And once you started doing the research and then getting out and meeting interesting foragers and tree people, tell me about this world that you discovered that you presumably didn't know much about before and perhaps you hadn't interacted with.
Well, when I was trying to figure out what the USP of my product was, I spent time meeting people who believe in the product as a good in itself. And that was amazing, because I really wanted to avoid the people who had some kind of purely religious or hippie-ish belief about the power of nature, because much as I respect their...
How did you filter them out?
Well, I guess just meeting people and talking to them about why they love what they do. But the people who attract me, because I'm a rationalist, I think, and the people who attract me were the ones who said, no, I want to teach you some stuff about the outdoors, and then we'll just see where it goes from there. And one guy in particular, Jeffrey McMullen, was a tank commander and served in Yugoslavia and in the Gulf, and he really inspired me, because he now runs courses to reconnect troubled young adults to the outdoors if they've got drink or drug problems or violence problems. And as you might imagine, for an ex-army guy, he's pretty straight down the line and says it as it is, but at the same time he has clearly a very deep belief that there's something very, very powerful. And after he made me sit still for an hour and just soak up nature, which is I realised something I'd not really done before, just sit and look. But he made me do that, and I had this, I guess, a kind of epiphany that there was something very powerful happening. I felt much calmer emotionally, physically better. I felt, I just felt great. And my immediate reaction at the time was to say, wow, this is like some sort of wonder drug. This is free. It's fun, because I was really enjoying my time with him, and it's good for you. I mean, there's not a lot that you can say about that. Not a lot you can say that about in the modern world. I've talked to my wife, who is even more unbiased than I am about this issue, and she says, yeah, that they demand to go outdoors more. They will say now, well, we could go out, or we why don't we go to the park? And the other day, Albie, who's my son, found a crow's wing that had obviously been, crow had been eaten by something, and he found the wing. And I don't think that before I was making this film, it was something that would have attracted him or made him, but I think as a result of doing it, he picked it up, he wanted to stretch it out, see where the muscles were and how did it work and where did it come from, and he just seemed a lot more engaged in it, and that was very thrilling for me to see. Yeah. And the other thing, it's funny, because I'm really lucky. My mum's got this little cottage in the middle of nowhere in Yorkshire, which we go and stay in sometimes. And there's a door in a kind of stable bit, and you need to leave it open at a certain time of year, because then the swallows will nest in the... And this kind of knowledge about when to leave the door open is, because her mother had it before her, this cottage, and it's a particular week, you've got to leave the door open. And I kind of got the feeling that without doing something like this process, that those kinds of thoughts might get lost in my family. Right. That I wouldn't be able to persuade my children to worry about leaving the door open in the way that I don't as much as my mum did. Right. So I think it's about, partly for me, it was about trying to find those family traditions about the natural world and keep them going.
Did you find others?
For me, well, my mother's got this amazing sloe gin recipe that she's been kind of slightly trying to persuade me to be interested in for years. And I've always been like, I don't really like slow gin and I'm not really that interested in it. And she was like, no, you don't understand. It's about when the slows ripen, and then it's about knowing when to forage for them, and then it's about making them and storing them and then drinking it at Christmas. And then she's got this thing where she takes them, I'm making it sound like an alcoholic, but she takes them out of the gin and then puts them in sherry for Easter. So we have slow sherry at Easter. And then she dips them in chocolate and you can get drunk on them even. So she's got the whole slow kind of seasons sorted. And I think as a result of going through this process, I've thought to myself, no, actually, I do want to know, I do want to care about that stuff, and I'd like it if my children knew about that as well.
Yeah. Well, lovely. Does she feature in it?
She does, yeah. She's in it quite a bit. I mean, she's pretty tough, but she's saddened about the lack of roaming area. Children's roaming area shrunk by 90% in the last 30 years. Right. So she roamed, she reckoned, in about 50 square miles where she grew up. I reckon I roamed in about 1 square mile. Right. And my children really will roam in our back garden. So, you know, that's a radical change over 3 generations.
Are you motivated? Sorry, I've got
a real adventure
on your kind of personal story with this, but are you motivated to actually uproot the family for that reason, or
no?
Or you can adapt. You adapt.
I feel really strongly, like when I started making the film, I thought this is going to be a city versus country thing. Country children are going to be really connected to nature. City ones aren't. Not true. Not my experience at all. Some of the most connected children were country children. So I mean, it had no bearing. And the other thing I thought was, it's going to be a class thing. Nice middle class parents will take their children out and frolic, and parents who have to work really hard to make ends meet won't. Again, totally untrue. Some of the most comfortably off kids I met were cooped up playing PlayStation all day, and vice versa. So no, I really feel like this isn't a thing. This isn't a thing about should you move to the country or the city, or should you have more money or less money and then you'll be okay. It's definitely not that. But I think, you know, it's much more of a kind of way of life question. Do you make the time? The UNICEF report says children report that they're happy if they get time outdoors with adults that they care about. It doesn't need to be parents, could be whatever. And British children report very low levels of happiness, and one of the big reasons for that is, I believe, that they get very little time outdoors with adults that they love. I think that children are always, nature will always be overwhelmed by brands when it comes to messaging. Children will always hear more messages from Disney and Nintendo and Coca-Cola than they will from Mother Nature. And that's just the way it is. And, you know, we really want to encourage the brands to join in with the Wild Network and help us to change that. And one of the ideas we had is if brands mimic nature in their marketing. So, like Apple uses an apple, and the Tory party use a tree, and the Lib Dems use a dove, or is it a swallow or something? I don't know. And Labour uses a rose, and you know you see it everywhere. Shell uses a shell, you know, despite.
I'm trying to think, as a nominally paid up member of the Green Party, what on earth do they do? I think it is a tree or something like that.
Well, in the case of the Green Party, we wouldn't be asking them for money, because I do think that what they're preaching is in line with their logo.
There's something there, yeah.
But I mean, the idea would be that anybody who uses a natural product to sell a non-natural thing would just pay a very small tithe, a small tax on their marketing budget every year, which would go towards marketing nature. I mean, I don't think technology is necessarily proven to be bad for children, as in physically bad for them. It's not, the science isn't really there to say it will kill them off, but what it does do is it displaces things from their lives that are really good for them. So there's lots of scientific evidence that time outside in nature is good for your blood pressure, that people who meet in nature have lower concerns about social differences, so it's a good leveler of. There's studies that show that prisoners who have views of nature recover better and have fewer illnesses than prisoners whose cells face into the prison. And so the science is there that this stuff is good, and these other products displace it from children's lives. So, you know, that's the problem.
As well as general release and film festivals, are you going to be in the boardrooms of Apple and the Tory Party, etc.? Are you, I know, I can see you're a man with a mission. I can see the light in your eyes now is burning. Are you going to, not Steve Jobs, but are you going to be tackling individuals head on?
Well, what we want to do with the Wild Network, which is this affiliation of organisations that have come together to raise the issue and to try to encourage.
Do name them now.
Oh, well, we've got the National Trust, the RSPB, the World Wildlife Fund, the Woodland Trust, the lots. I've left lots out, but there are many of them. They've all come together and they've said they very flatteringly enjoyed the film. They feel that the film is a fresh take on to get this message out, and they want to use it to campaign to get more children to go outdoors. So there are going to be personal asks. So currently the personal ask is try and match, at the weekend, try and match your screen time with wild time. So if you watch an hour of telly, go outdoors for an hour. If you spend 2 hours on the iPad, go outdoors for 2 hours. It's just a real simple metric in your mind. Let's try and balance those two things. But we also have got community asks. So try and get your roads closed. Try and get your children outside into their own street. Reclaim it once a month. Put bollards up. You can organise it through your local council and get your street back so that your children can play on it without being afraid of traffic. But then there are political asks, and there are also asks in the corporate world. And I think asking people who use natural logos to sell non-natural products for some money to help us market nature would be one of those corporate asks. And the political asks are stop selling off playing fields, put nature in the curriculum.
Is that beginning now? Are you engaging?
We're engaging, we're beginning to engage, and we're hunting for what the right ask is. But it's the start. It's the start.
And also tell us about your great team, some of which are here tonight. Tell us about everyone's roles and their inputs and ideas, and how from your initial idea how it spinballed out.
So these things get made by a lot of people, and Ashley, who's the producer, who's here, he and I have been working together for years now, and he was absolutely fundamental in helping me come up with the idea, or coming up with it himself, in fact, much of it. So there's a sort of massive team with him and me. There's Lorraine, who's our assistant producer, and lots of wonderful camera people, some of whom are here tonight. Fantastic sound people, but then editors who've just struggled over this crazy story that we've told for, we've had 2 editors who've done amazing work. At the end of the film, we carved the credits into pieces of wood. You'll see this, I'm giving it away, but you'll see this tomorrow, and there's a fantastic track playing, Kate Bush track. And we see all of these names that have helped us, basically, without whom we wouldn't have made this over the last 2 years, and there's a lot of them. Yeah. Yes, I do have a message for children, which is that when I was making the film, I made my daughter lick a frog. And I gave her a Tic Tac every time she licked the frog. And she thought that was a fair exchange because she really likes Tic Tacs. And actually now, she's, having been really freaked out by frogs, she's really into them, picks them up whenever she sees them. Anyway, the reason for that wasn't because I'm some sort of weird person, but I was making a poster with her licking a frog as though it was almost like an ice cream and looking really excited. So my message was to go outside and lick a frog. They don't taste as bad as they look. So if you go to www.projectwildthing.com, you can find out where to see the film, and you can join the movement and help us to engage British children with nature.